beautiful Celtic hearts. Welcome to the Festival of Lughnasa. It's lovely to be here with you. As we track through, we're on the 7th festival in the cycle. Can you believe it? Just one more to go in our cycle, which will happen in about 6 weeks' time at the autumn equinox. But for now, we're in Lughnasa, the Festival of the Harvest, and it's the third festival in the Samos, bright half of the year. So remember, we have the dark half of the year, which starts at Samhain, runs through Baltana, and then the Samos, or the bright half, solar, masculine part of the year, which started at Bealtaine. So we're into the third festival in this. And then, of course, we're at the fourth and final cross-quarter day, or Earth Festival. So again, just reminding you, Earth festivals are all the cross-quarter days, Samhain, Imbolc, Bealtaine and Lughnasa, and then we have, in between all of those, we have the solstices and equinoxes, and they make up the 8 festivals. So just like all the cross-quarter days, Samhain, Imbolc, Bealtaine, Lughnasa is the threshold into the new season. So it's at the cross-quarter days that the new season starts. So in, say, for instance, Samhain was the threshold into winter. So now Lughnasa is the threshold into autumn, into the fall, and it brings us into the beautiful, beautiful season of the harvest. And it's really, like it's a culmination of all the festivals up to now, because we're really harvesting what has been, you know, the triumph over darkness that we went through in the dark half of the year. So the name Lughnasa, Lughnasa, it means Lu, and so it points us to the deity that's celebrated. It's the presiding deity over Lughnasa in his mythology. Is the center of this festival. So the great god Lu, who I'll talk a little bit more about, a wonderful god, both high king and god, and it means, Lughnasa means Lu's assembly. So it's a gathering that Lu initiates, and we'll find out how the mythology brings us into that understanding of what Lughnasa is about. So the fixed day is celebrated on the 1st of August. If you remember, each of these festivals have a fixed day, and of each of the cross-quarter days have a fixed day, and then they also have an astrological day. So the astrological celebration of Lughnasa in 2020, which the astrological day, if you remember, changes every year. So the astrological date for 2020 is Sunday, the 2nd of August, around, I think it's at 1:30 p.m. That would be Dublin time, Irish time. So adjust if you need to. And it occurs at 10 degrees of Leo. So again, that whole sense of Leo and Lu, Leo, the great sun god, Lu, the great sun god, you know, it just shows us how all this ancient wisdom and the ancient mythology is so connected. So yeah, that's the astrological date that it's celebrated in 2020, and as I say, that changes every year. So Lughnasa is really a time of gathering. The tribes assembled to celebrate the harvest. It was the celebration of the tribe and the land coming together, the fruits of that harvest, the victory over darkness, and the fruits of the victory of that victory. That's what's really celebrated. And it's happening, you know, this festival happened when, just before the tribe went into into the really hard work of the harvest. So this was a time of real celebration when the first fruits were being harvested, and there was a moment to celebrate and rest before they really kicked off into the heavier work. In the Irish Celtic tradition, there's a wonderful work by a woman called Maura MacNeill. She brought out this beautiful book in 1962. It's just a joy it's a lot. I haven't studied it all, but I've really delved into it in the last couple of years. It's just called the Festival of Lughnasa, and it's such a rich repository of and study of, you know, the ancient and folk traditions around this festival. So if you ever, it's out of print. I can only get it in a library. I think it's out of print, or else it's extraordinarily expensive. I can't remember, but I know I just go to the library and I ask. There's only a couple of copies in the libraries around Dublin, and but I always, around this time, always go and delve into it a little bit more. And I have a dream of just taking a month and really just going right into it. But it's a real joy. Anybody who's kind of into that kind, it's just such a beautiful book to even open. You know, it's so gorgeous. So yeah, if you're drawn to that, that's a lovely resource to really move and study and around this time. So if you think about nature at this time, you know, we can feel like things are really coming into into their ripeness. The sun is still high in the sky here in the Celtic lands, but there is a sense. I was even feeling it last week, and it's probably because I have attuned to the wheel. When we were younger, we kind of thought summer went from June, July, August, and our holidays revolve around that. But actually, what's happening at the beginning of August is that we're stepping into autumn. And even last week, I could feel a sense of autumn in the air. So when you start to attune to these energies, it's really interesting. You get very tuned to the subtlety of nature, which is a great gift of this wheel for me anyway. And just feeling that, part of me felt a bit sad, thinking, oh, is the summer over? But also it's at the same time, you just let yourself move in with it, and you know it's just going to take you, so that, you know, it's just part of the cycle. But it is that whole, we are in that place of just moving into a change in the wheel. We can really feel that inevitable turn at this time. But yet it's a time to celebrate. So that's one of the things that I love about this. We're going to be working around with joy. One of the, how I work with Lughnasa, one of the themes and ways I work with Lughnasa is working with joy, but also working with joy and its opposite, that kind of sadness. And some of the mythology speaks into that too. So the energies of Lughnasa is gathering, appreciation, joy, wildness, exuberance. You know, the tribe gathered on high ground, on like an axis mundi, on mountains and hills. And there were great feasts of the first fruits. They had pageants and games, really competitive games, matchmaking, you know, and then there was trade between the tribes. So it was a real time of, you know, of abundance, and abundance of all those energies, and the great joy of coming together. So that's really the essence of what when we were really feeling into the energies of Lughnasa. This is what, from our ancestors, this is what we touch into, that sense of joy, abundance, gathering, celebration, marking the blessings of our lives, and what are we here, what are we harvesting right now. So the mythology tells us a lot about these themes, and about the themes of Lughnasa as they were celebrated. We have two kind of main characters, or main characters of Lughnasa mythology. So Lu, which was the great god, and Taltu, who was his foster mother. They're both the god and goddess that are celebrated at this time in the Irish tradition. Lu, we met at Lu, I don't know if you remember it, you may not have, but we met Lu at his birth at the winter solstice. If you want to go back and just check that out, just his mythology of his birth. We worked a little bit with that at the beginning, in the, you know, the second season or the second festival we worked with, which was the winter solstice. But now we meet Lu he has come into his virality. He is the hero. He is the great gifted one. He was called the Samel Donach, which means the great gifted, many gifted one. And he was a brilliant figure in the Tuatha Dé Danann, who were the divine people of Irish mythology. He was half Fomorian and half Tuatha Dé Danann. So they were the two different tribes in the Neolithic time, around the Neolithic time in the Celtic tradition. So he represents the beneficial solar energy, masculine energy, that the beneficial of illumination and fertility, in the sense of, you know, as the sun, the solar energy, as it shines, it works with the feminine, of course, to create growth. And he carries his spear, which is the invincible spear of Lu. And in one of the myths, in his adversary is his grandfather, actually, Balor, who was the giant, and he was a Fomorian. And he meets him at the Battle of Moytira, the Great Battle of Moytira. So Balor really represented the more harmful solar aspect, that excessive, you know, that if Balor of the he was like a giant with an eye, Balor's eye, which was like a Fomorian eye, that if it hit something, it could kill, or if it glared at something, it would kill. So this is often depicted as that harmful solar masculine, which, you know, that scorching glare will cause drought. So too much solar energy, too much excess solar energy, as we've been seeing in the world, and in our contemporary world, that too much of this doing and too much of being constantly in overproduction and it will actually create destruction. So those are, you know, Lu is he has victory over Balor in that myth. And in that myth, when he becomes the king, the high king after that, and saves the Tuatha Dé Danann, and also gains the secrets of a secret knowledge of how to harness the sun's energy, so that for food, and that's how the Tuatha Dé Danann then survive. And then in another myth of Lughnasa, there is the fight of Lu again, the great gifted Lu, the many gifted one. He's Lu of the long arm, is often known to. And he comes up against and fights against Crumdove, who was it translates as the black bent one. And Crumdove had a bull, and he wanted to keep the harvest for himself. So, and then sometimes that's told, that same legend is told, that the harvest is represented by a goddess that he keeps underground, in a hostage underground, and she's freed by Lu, or that the bull is killed by Lu. And in that same way, that he is the savior, he is the hero of the harvest. So again, it's that sense of, you know, that solar masculine, that acts with great integrity, and saves the harvest. So that's the mythology around Lu, or some of the mythology. There's so much mythology around Lu. You know, and his victory over those adversaries, he gets the secret knowledge and saves the day. And then some would say that Lu was kind of recast as Saint Patrick in the Christian, when the Christians came, and the Christian monks took the mythology of Lu and recast it as Saint Patrick, which again is connected into Lughnasa, because in Ireland, Lughnasa is celebrated. The beginning of Lughnasa is celebrated by a climb up Croagh Patrick, the great mountain of St. Patrick in Mayo, and that's on the last Sunday in July, which is often when Lughnasa is started to be celebrated. So there's some connection between St. Patrick and Lu, the great god Lu. And then I've read other places where Lu and the whole symbology of Lu is associated with Archangel Michael as well, you know, with the spear. I suppose Archangel really he has a sword, but anyway, it's curious just how some of these motifs and images really blend together, make sense too. And then we've got Taltu, who is this wonderful goddess of the harvest. She was also an earth goddess, and she was Lu's foster mother. When Lu had to be taken off at birth, he was fostered out to, he had a number of foster parents, and Taltu was one of his foster parents. And she died in the ancient annals, the Laura Gabola. I think it was, yes, Laura Gabola, that it was said that she died of overwork and exhaustion when she was clearing the Midlands of Ireland for cultivation. So she represents, in a way, that her death as the land, as the goddess of the land, that her death, she has to die in order to feed the tribe. It's like she is the grain that must die in order to feed the tribe. And when she died, Lu organized funeral games. And it was an assembly that he brought together on the site of the mound that he built for her. And it's in a place called Telstown in County Meath. And he created the games, the funeral games for her, to lament her and to lament the sacrifice that she had, the sacrifice of her death. And the Thaltan Games, which they ran right through until the Norman invasion of Ireland. And then they were in the Great Celtic Revival in the early 1920s, in the Gaelic League. The Thaltan Games were actually reinstated, and they ran for, I think, three times through the 20s. But there was a big revival of these Thaltan Games, almost set up like the Olympic Games in Ireland. And, you know, it's just interesting. If you're interested in that, there's a lot of that you can find out about that, because it was, there's a lot written on that in that time of that Celtic revival that happened in the early 20th century, 1920. I think those Thaltan Games, the first Thaltan Games, were in 1924. So the rituals that are celebrated, which at this time, the rituals and the celebrations of the Festival of Lughnasa, one was there was an assembly. So it's that assembly, that funeral games that were initiated by Lu to honor his foster mother, that continued as a tradition. So there was an assembly on a height somewhere, on a mountain or a hill, and often there would be water associated with it. Allegedly, it would be like a well or a lake on that hill. That's where the assembly, or what became known as the Enoch, the fair. And these had athletic games, friendly contests between tribes, and then there was a ritual killing and sacrifice of a bull, which just again picks up that mythology of the Crumdove and Lu's victory over the Crumdove. And then there was the horses would be led into water. It would be a kind of a ritual game where horses were ridden by men through water. And that was again a symbolizing of that tempering of that solar masculine. So the horse would symbolize the solar masculine in the Celtic tradition, and then bringing them through water was a tempering of that solar masculine, and a healing. Again, like in the Celtic tradition, the purification always happens either through water or fire. The second thing, or the other things that rituals that carried out, or we know about, were the cutting of the first sheath of grain, and that is that would then be done in a ritualistic way, and then bread would be made from that first harvest of the grain, and that would be eaten as part of the feast, as would the first fruits of that were picked of the harvest. So, I mean, often we think of, well, actually, the name Bilberry Sunday is one of the names given to the Festival of Lughnasa, that on the first Sunday of August, that people would go and pick bilberries and blueberries, and the first of the autumn berries. And then, so whatever was anything that was from that harvest, the new fruits of the harvest were picked. They could be wild or cultivated. So the sheath of grain or the wild blueberries and bilberries, and then they were feasted on. The great play that was written, Dancing at Lughnasa, some of you might have seen it as a film, a brilliant play, which was set in Donegal in northwest of Ireland, and that whole piece around picking blueberries and Blueberry Sunday is part of that play and that film, and then the wildness is part of the sisters in the play get up and do this wild dance, and that's the energy of Lughnasa, you know, this kind of really wild abandon. Wonderful play. The flowers were also a part of it, but flowers were usually, again, were worn as garlands, and again, it's been called Garland Sunday in some places, or High Sunday. So flowers would have been worn as garlands, or flowers and berries were worn, and then they were buried at the top of the hill, just to symbolize the end of summer, as was maybe this sheath of grain was either, the first sheath of grain was also buried. So it's that symbol of the recognition that summer is over and that we're moving into a new season. And then that wildness was another aspect of the festival, particularly with the young couples or young men and young women, trial marriages and hand fasting. So if a couple came and decided they wanted to get married, they could be married for a year and a day. If it didn't work out, they'd come back a year and a day later and have it dissolved. And then there was that kind of wildness of, you know, just young men and women just at the height of at the harvest, or the beginning of the harvest, really in that celebratory mode. Young men would make garlands of berries and flowers for women, give them to women. Lots of that, different stories of that kind of what we could see as the symbol of the masculine and feminine coming together, the magic of the magic, fertility magic really coming together, and that eros, the celebration of that eros. We saw it at Bealtaine too. Let me read from Maura McNeil's. She says, a remarkable feature of these Lughnasa celebrations is that so many survived into the 19th and 20th century without having been taken over by Christianity. Of course, they had shed all obvious connections with the pagan rite and lived on as festival outings, as annual occasions for meetings, sports, dancing, courting, and faction fighting. So that comes from the Festival of Lughnasa. So it was a custom right through until the 20th century for people to gather on the high point to just, the pagan rite had been lost very much, but it still had the essence of that. So things like fairs, like there was a great fair in Ireland called the Puck Fair in Kerry, and that would really be that the energy of that would be, and the origin of that would have come from that Lughnasa, the gathering and the assembly of people. And there are a lot of saints' pattern days in August. So the pattern day is the feast day of the saint, and they can be traced back again to that pagan festival and just more absorbed into the Christian tradition and Christian calendar. And as I said, that Croagh Patrick in Mayo, it's called Reek Sunday, that the climbing of Croagh Patrick, which became a Christian pilgrimage, a very, very important Christian pilgrimage right up until this day, that has echoes of the Lughnasa. It's the last Sunday of July. And then that connection between St. Patrick and Lugh, it's all kind of interesting. So what are the, what's the invitation of Lughnasa? Like, well, how do we work with the Lughnasa energies in our contemporary world? There's three ways that I work with it. The celebration and joy, like those energies of celebration and joy, like just as we worked with, if you think about what we worked with in Samhain was much more about letting go, surrender, moving inwards. The Lughnasa energies are about celebration and joy, and how do you show up with that, around that in your life? The second is, the second way of working with them really is harvesting our gifts. It's a time we can work with Lughnasa energies to really harvest our gifts, to know what's ripe for picking in our lives. And then the third is that balancing of the excessive or hyper masculine solar power, to how do we really pay attention to this, particularly in our contemporary world, to this hyper masculine that so many of us are in, that we have just been socialized into being around that. So yeah, so let me go back to the celebration of and the joy. Like what is your relationship to joy? Do you stop to count your blessings? Do you pause and gather and really count the blessings? We often gather and assemble, through different rites of passage, through weddings, and although right now with COVID, it's less so, but so actually even now we are being given this time to pause, to slow it down, count our blessings, and notice what is your relationship to joy. Do you live from joy? Or, like, we know we are, as humans, we are just wired for negativity. And that's an old evolutionary impulse in us. And I really feel now we are being invited at this time on the planet to grow our capacity to grow our capacity for joy, so that we rewire our whole neurology. There's some wonderful studies been done on this right at the moment, and wonderful writing on our capacity for joy. So, and then just, do you celebrate? Do you stop to count your blessings? I had a great example of this in my own life. My father was a great man for counting his blessings, and he left a great legacy to us in his passing. I remember even as he was dying, he was speaking to us and telling us we should be great and joy and so grateful for the great life that he had and the great life that we had with him. And he was so right. He was just putting his attention on what was good and counting and letting in the good, rather than, as well as he wasn't bypassing his sadness and his suffering as he moved towards his passing. But it was just a beautiful teaching for me. He was a great teacher for me around joy and really counting our blessings. So the second then way of that I work with it is harvesting the gifts. So we each have unique gifts. We may not be special. I think we're better to know we're not special, but we are unique. And we have gifts, every single one of us and every single one of you. You have a gift. You have many gifts. You have your soul's gift, which are unique to you. And my sense is right now on the planet, again, in where we find ourselves, is that we are really being invited to own our gifts. And the Lughnasa energies are about harvesting the gifts. Lugh was the great gifted, the many gifted one, and he shone. He did not hide his light under a bushel. He came out, and he, in his inhabiting his gifts, he was victorious, and he brought the Tuatha De Danann great victory. So this is energy we can work with at this time, where, you know, we have gifts that the world really needs now, and if we don't use them, they will die on the vine, like the fruit dies on the vine that it's ripe. So just really feeling into, or just spending time contemplating, like, what are the gifts? And there are many ways to really contemplate and feel into that. Go out in nature, but just hold the inquiry. What is ripe right now? What needs to be harvested? What gifts have I that I can bring to the world, so we can start to create a very different world than the world that we have lived into in this last while. And then the last theme really that I work with is balancing those excessive, hyper masculine energies that, again, in our contemporary world, we get so burnt out with, you know, and we don't rest, and we don't take time to renew. And the great Celtic wheel shows us that the cycle is not a is a cycle that really, or the cycles of nature teach us that we can't continuously this grow and expand without a contraction that's needed. So what we want is, the masculine is strong and beautiful, and it manifests, and it brings formless into form. And when we produce, we're producing, we're making, we're doing, and it has great gifts. But if we continue to do that without any renewal, without that tempering it with the feminine, so like in that symbol of the horses being brought through water, or it was also an auspicious, or felt that any rain around Lughnasa was considered auspicious, because it's that tempering of the water, of the cooling gammas energy. When we've had enough of Samos energy, any more will mean that we will have destruction. We will create a wasteland. So it's the same in our lives. If we don't temper our masculine, which in the Celtic wheel, when we move all right the way through the Samos energies, that whole Samos season, or that whole Samos period, half the year, I'm always working with, how do we bring the feminine in, so it doesn't destroy us, that very penetrative masculine energy of us being out in the world doing. So that's another way you can work with the Lughnasa, energies of Lughnasa at this time. So just to bring it to a completion, here, yeah, enjoy this festival of gathering. We can't gather so in big crowds, like, you know, those great summer festivals, music festivals and great festivals. They've all been stopped this year through it, right across the planet. So can you bring maybe some people together in your life, in a small way, and celebrate? Just even bring a group of women together, just celebrate your gifts, count your blessings, and ask, what is ripe and ready to be harvested, to be celebrated in my life. What gifts have I that actually, if I step into them and step up into my gifts, and I take my place in the world, that is really connected to this, our soul, the soul's gift that you came in with. If you willingly step up to that and harvest it now, because the planet needs you, humanity needs you. And then just, what brings you joy? What blessings can you count at this time in your life? It may not be easy with how the planet is and how we are in this meta crisis, but actually it's really important that, I mean, there were so many beautiful blessings in the COVID lockdown that we could count, as well as the challenges. But where is our focus? Is it more on the challenges than on the blessings? So see if you can just take that and yeah, contemplate that over the festival of Lughnasa. And don't forget to have the crack and fun and a bit of wildness, because that is the true essence of this festival. So yeah, enjoy the festival, and I will see you again. I'll see some of you through the season. the wisdom holders and wisdom carriers. I'll be seeing you in our practices and our calls through the season, through this whole next 6 weeks. And wisdom seekers, I'll see you again at the autumn equinox for our final festival in the cycle, with so much love.